Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all, and thanks for joining us this morning for this branching out session. I'm John Sanderson. I'm with the Center for Collaborative Conservation, and I've been part of this amazing team that's listed here on this slide, who helped to really was at the core of organizing and putting on the summit. And really big thank you to all of these folks on this list for being a part of this. As is mentioned, if you got a chance to look at the report that just went out this morning, you'll see a statement that this truly was a collaborative effort. A lot of different folks from a lot of different organizations putting this on, including I can see some names on the call already, several of you um, who helped contribute to the event as well. So big thank you to all of you for being with us this morning. Um, so uh, I've been filling in at the Center for Collaborative Conservation for the Forest Collaboratives Network coordinator, Katie McGrath Novak. She's going to be back at work after the holiday, but meanwhile, it's this team that has put together and organized the summit, and we've done a couple of events since summit, and here we are today to just review what summit was, what the content was, and what some of the big takeaways were. And we're going to be particularly interested in your thoughts on those takeaways. So, as you know, the Colorado Forest Collaborative Summit is convened by the Forest Collaboratives Network in partnership with, as I said, a whole bunch of organizations. And the purpose of the summit is really to connect place-based forest collaboratives from all across Colorado to learn about the issues that are most relevant to collaboratives. We'll get into that a little bit more. But we've also seen that a really important purpose of the summit is also just to get folks in a room together to be able to connect on what's going on in our world today. And that definitely showed up in the summit. So for today, we're going to have some opportunity to connect among us and get our thoughts, get your thoughts on these key takeaways from summit. We are going to go through a presentation and review those key takeaways. And then we're also going to explore some possible follow-up action from the summit. So this was the agenda of the summit. For any of you who weren't there and got to experience this, it was 2 days long on the 17th and 18th of September. In the morning of day one, we did a field trip. In the afternoon of day one, we did a workshop on the power of storytelling and how to tell a really effective story. Day two was the real hands-on working session, and the morning was really focused on a range of topics that affect how we collaborate and how we might want to collaborate differently given the way things have been changing this year, and looks like they're going to continue to change going forward. In the afternoon on that second day was all about funding. And so we're going to touch on both of those things today. And again, get some opportunity for you to give us your thoughts on it. Okay, so I mentioned that today we are thinking a lot about what we might do to follow up from Summit to focus on some of those key takeaways. Possibly we'll be getting your input on where we might want to put that attention. This slide just shows a variety of ways that we might carry this conversation forward. So in the Forest Collaboratives Network itself, we do these branching out sessions. We've done a couple of cohort-based workshops that some of you might have participated in. We do a little bit of research on specific applied topics here at CSU. And as you may know, we also engage a lot with the Colorado Forest Health Council. So those are all ways that I and Katie and others associated with the network can help carry some of this work forward. You may have already heard about the Wildfire and Watershed Initiative for Resilient Colorado. That is an ongoing entity that you're going to hear about more during this presentation. And uh, coalitions and collaboratives and partners are going to be working on a Lunch and Learn webinar series focused on local funding. And this list is not intended to be restrictive. We could possibly do other things as well. So I just wanted to plant these seeds to get you all thinking about ways that we might continue this conversation forward. And then with that, I'm going to pause for a second and pass it over to Maria.
Hello, everyone. You can't see my face, but this is my voice. My name is Maria Brandt. I'm just gonna momentarily leave this Menti slide up. We're gonna be using this to collect ideas and rankings and get engagement from you all. The QR code allows you to bring this up real quick on your phone. You may want to open it up in a separate browser, just given the comments and feedback you might want to pass along. I'm just going to advance forward this to you just so you all know that polling is anonymous. So we just ask that we're all professional and respectful. And then just know that I am monitoring the back end on Zoom too. So whatever you need, feel free. I'll try, well, I will keep up with all of you as our presenters are moving along. So I'm your back end support. And with that, we're just going to hop on into Menti.
This first question is just a question here to get a sense of how you all are feeling. And I want to point out that we initially thought about this question as like a multiple choice option, and two of our options were curious and overwhelmed. So it's funny to see those as the first populated here. Lots of folks, I think, feeling the end of year rush and also desire for rest. It's funny how those come at the same time. Lots of curiosity. That's great.
That is great.
Looks like we got a lot of people logging in as well to Menti. So most of our attendees are logged in.
So if any of you are still typing in your answer, I'm going to go ahead and advance since the crew has quite the presentation, but just know that we'll still be collecting your answers on that bit as well.
That's great.
Yeah, good to get a sense of um, who will be hearing brand new information potentially if they couldn't make it, and who can kind of bolster some of the conversations maybe they were part of.
Yeah, I'm excited to see all of you who weren't able to make it to Summit, and please do check out the report. I edited. I don't get any credit for the content. That's Esther and Chaska and and others who contributed to that, and Audrey, who's not with us, not on the call today, unable to make it. But there's a lot in that report that we will touch on today, but definitely pull that up take a look through that to really see what we focused on and what we took away from the event.
I don't quite think we're ready for this one yet.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a lot of people logged into the Mentimeter. You can still log in while the presentation is going, but maybe we should dive in.
Okay. Share again. Maria and I are going back and forth, so thanks for your patience in advance. So day one was a field trip in the morning and a storytelling workshop in the afternoon. And then I haven't mentioned yet, both days had a wonderful social in the evening. Just tell you a little bit about both of those. For the field trip itself, there were 50 some people you can see in this photo that got out into the field to see work that's actually happening on the ground. We went to these 3 different sites and real excellent conversation and focus on what's going on in these places, what has worked well, where have there been some challenges. But a really lovely day, as you can see, with blue skies and a few puffy clouds, but mostly some excellent dialogue on the ground. And huge thank you to the individuals and organizations that helped to put on this field trip. This is, by the way, for those of you who haven't ever made it to a summit, this field trip is always one of the real highlights for the summit. And then in the afternoon, I'm just going to give you a quick taste of what we talked about. And there's quite a bit more in the report on this power of storytelling workshop. And what's showing on the page here is just some of the high level nuggets. There are even more in the report itself about how to really do effective communication in the communities in which you're working. And we all need to do more of this. This was a real common theme. We need to expand our audiences. We need to create that social license. And what you're seeing on this page here are some things that we know research has demonstrated and real trained communicators know that these are points we need to keep in mind as we're communicating. And if we employ this framework that we talked about in this workshop, then we can be more effective communicators with our audiences. And that's all I'm going to say about day one. And we are right on time, Chaska, as I pass it over to you. So why don't you take it from here?
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Shaska Huayhuaca. I'm a program manager at the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about day two's morning session. I helped coordinate this session with Jonathan Bruno of Coalitions and Collaboratives and Laura Hickey with CDR Associates. And the goal of the session was for summit participants to hear about themes emerging from recent national level discussions and explore challenges and solutions to those themes. Could you go to the next slide, John? So the conversations built on 2 events from earlier this year, the Future of the Forest Partnership Summit in Boulder in June, and the 9th American Forest Congress in DC in July. And the major themes that were coming out of those larger discussion were used to frame up the in-depth table discussions at the CFCN Summit. And those were community engagement, communication storytelling, indigenous partnerships, collaborative resilience, climate resilience, forest products and biomass, and workforce. Next slide, please. So we asked participants at each of several tables and in virtual rooms to focus on one theme for the duration of the session, and each theme had different discussion questions to explore the topic. I then afterwards reviewed the table notes and the report out responses to identify these kind of key takeaways and organize those around what's working, what are some remaining challenges, like what's working that you want leadership here, what are some remaining challenges or barriers, and what are some ideas that could potentially be carried forward. And I want to note that we didn't really ask participants to think about who would carry those things forward. And so some of these, as we talk about some of those takeaways, may make sense for other networks. But yeah, we'll discuss more at the end of this presentation about what CFCN might be able to incorporate into work planning for 2026. If anything, it is their work plan. Next slide, please. All right, so for the theme of community engagement, table participants pointed to successes and how place-based collaboratives are doing better at working with agencies to create this kind of like chain of collaboration idea. They're linking agencies to diverse actors, including trusted local partners and like local messengers to engage with the public. So communities are then interfacing with local champions and not just with government officials. And they pointed to this as an example of a success. It's building trust, it's helping partners to share risk. Table discussions had a lot of really rich examples of locally tailored outreach strategies, like pulling realtors, for example, into neighborhood ambassador programs, and doing kind of lunch and learns and barbecues, et cetera. And also really noted that it's important to take time for recognition and celebration. But several challenges remain, particularly for capacity and funding for outreach positions. Sustaining momentum and reaching beyond the usual faces. They pointed out that these tried and true outreach events they've been putting on are often struggling to kind of bring new faces into the mix. Having a lot of the same people show up, and eventually that sort of detracts from momentum. Also pointed out that disinformation and selective science continues to be a big challenge. Next slide, please. So some ideas for things to move forward with community engagement were just continuing to push for more capacity and flexible funding for outreach personnel, exploring new models of financing to support community engagement. We'll hear more about that from Esther in a bit. And then strategies to address community engagement challenges or share successes that could happen through peer learning, for example. Next slide. Okay, communications and storytelling. So this table had some overlap with some of the participants from the previous day's communications training. And in alignment with some of the findings that were presented at that training and that John sort of highlighted on that slide, participants in this discussion felt that outreach at the local level about wildfire and resilience is working, and that homeowners, landowners, and recreators are generally receptive to action or to active management on public and private lands. And the main challenge that group highlighted boils down to this lack of influence and champions to carry forest and wildfire resilience messaging forward. And they suggested that to address that challenge, there's a need to expand the reach of messaging to speak to all Coloradans, not just folks living in the wildland urban interface. So for example, the U.S. Forest Service at that training talked about how they've been partnering with Statler Nagel and Forest Trends in developing messaging that's more effective than what we've tried before. And that may be of interest for the CFCN to explore further. Next slide, please. Okay, based on the table notes I was looking at, it sounds like there was a really rich discussion around this particular topic of Indigenous partnerships, like how to build authentic relationships, more ethically co-create knowledge with tribes. And participants noted that one thing that's working is that partners have access to a growing body of knowledge and experience about what works to build successful collaborations with tribes, like showing up to their meetings and volunteering and taking time to listen and engage. And in addition, they discussed that there's more existing toolkits now and more trainings available, like through the Land Trust Alliance, CCC, and others, to support partnership building, trainings on topics from like history to cross-cultural communication to legal structures and pathways for engagement. So, so more tools are available. Also, progress, they point out that progress is visible where capacity is being built, for example, through dedicated tribal liaison positions. But they emphasize that it's still a challenge to get leadership across all levels to prioritize and invest seriously in those relationships. So we know that building authentic relationships and knowledge co-creation is important, but it takes time and it really requires doing your homework. With all these resources out there, we know that tribes are stretched thin. And that is a challenge for many entities right now, but particularly for nonprofits who, are constrained by a lack of time and funding and personnel, especially kind of facing increased scrutiny for engaging with tribes and other, marginalized communities. So next slide, please. So some ideas that people wanted to see movement on included funding and empowerment for Indigenous jobs and leadership, more liaison positions, supporting policy discussions to address constraints to cultural burning. So for example, like perhaps exemptions to red card certification or like expanding agricultural exemptions for burning to cultural exemptions at the state level. And sharing and learning from successful examples of, for example, Indigenous-led stewardship and job programs or cultural burning in like California and Oregon beyond Colorado. So that's an idea. Next slide, please. Several tables were dedicated to the topic of collaborative resilience. Common theme was that despite recent turbulence, Colorado's collaborative culture remains strong. The need for collaboration prevails and partners are showing up in new ways. There's a lot of gratitude expressed, especially for federal partners. Discussions underscored that we should stay focused on what we know, what works, like sharing decision space, even when that means organizations need to cede some control, and designing and implementing structures that facilitate shared decision-making and shared accountability. Some emphasize the need to stay focused on accomplishing the goal, measuring and showing progress, and sustaining momentum, because momentum is rewarded and funded. Another table pointed to the tried and true mantra of, moving at the speed of trust and assuming good intentions. And with current emphasis on efficiency and realignment of the Forest Service, I think we also kind of need to lean into that mantra of go slow to go fast. So some challenges, obviously funding uncertainty, constraints on federal capacity, huge, staff transition. With all the turbulence, it's difficult to plan ahead. And there's an emotional toll as well. Echoing a discussion at the community engagement table, one table was pointing to how when budgets tighten, investments in collaborative capacity and communication efforts are often the first to get cut. And they wanted decision makers to hear the outcomes on the ground are tied to people's capacity and the momentum that they create through communication. Another table felt that the barriers aren't always financial and that administrative bottlenecks can stall locally driven projects even when funding is available, and provided several examples of what that looks like slower approval processes, challenges with reforms to, or a need for procedural reforms to Tabor, for example. So that's something that could be explored. And I think the other piece there was like this general feeling that collaboratives are pretty overloaded right now. And we need to be intentional and efficient with place-based collaboratives so that they can focus on local level impact and show up for communities. Next slide, please. So yeah, some ideas for CFCN. This is obviously a space that is the CFCN really focuses on already, but reducing administrative bottlenecks for programs that fund collaborative work, looking at contracting delays, match requirement challenges, and so forth, could be something to carry forward. Continuing to provide spaces for collaboratives to address uncertainty, strategies for continuity and adaptation during times of uncertainty, new funding mechanisms again, and then potentially working on looking at ways to strengthen good neighbor authority came up, or expand good neighbor authority so that states can get more work done on fed lands and just kind of build out more cross-boundary work. Next slide. Okay. Climate resilience. Table participants talked a lot about their experiences implementing climate smart planning frameworks like resist, accept, direct, and how they translate those plans into actions. And in terms of what's working, one table pointed to widespread interest from practitioners and the public to integrate climate smart planning into forest management. There's a lot of interest in some parts of the state and readiness to embrace those frameworks. Another table talked a lot about how the Colorado Water Conservation Board's Wildfire Ready Watersheds program is a really great example of what works in this sort of realm of climate smart planning, saying that they are, it's nimble, it provides a plan and structure for funding and partners to rally around, it's holistic, it goes from pre to post fire, it includes a lot of different sectors, and we could learn a lot by looking at examples of this playing out on the ground. However, challenges included capacity to integrate climate smart planning, coordination of climate smart planning across jurisdictions, and enduring attachments, like communities just wanting to see forests as they were. Next slide. So suggestions from the climate resilience tables really got into the weeds, and you can read more about it in the summary report. But higher level ideas that could be pursued by CFCN might be like advancing coordination for these planning frameworks across in cross-boundary settings, sharing among collaboratives about effective tools and practices for moving from the planning to action, and then facilitating alignment around the Forest Health Council's 30-year vision to ensure that that vision, as it moves forward, integrates past planning efforts and gets fully funded and is implemented across sectors. Next slide. Okay, forest products and biomass. So this topic, participants discussed how forest health and local economies are deeply connected, emphasized the need to make biomass utilization feasible and profitable. Things they wanted to share with leadership that are working included that emerging products like biochar and mass timber, wood straw, these goods are showing promise and turning byproducts of forest management into marketable materials while also advancing wildfire mitigation and carbon goals. They pointed to solutions that are making access to markets more equitable, like loans for wood utilization and large-scale contracting to sustain loggers long-term. One table said that actually workforce is expanding in some parts of the state. The landscapers are moving into wildfire mitigation, and there's a growing number of forest treatment companies. But barriers to utilization remain in terms of high costs, high diesel prices, transportation and hauling, equipment, land purchases, and so forth. There's still limited outlets for biomass and processing infrastructure and risk of mill closures, and then funding gaps faced by newer and smaller businesses. Next slide. So to strengthen kind of the economic backbone of the industry, people suggest exploring policy solutions like state tax incentives for users of Colorado-made forest products, low interest loans, state-funded value-added producer grants, and just working to sustain investment in local processing and workforce development, which takes me to the last of the themes. Thank you. So highlights from the workforce discussion were short and sweet. What's working? We know that workforce retention hinges on recognition, camaraderie, quality of life, and clear career pathways. We know that well-supported, well-trained, and retained workforce is key for making progress in forest and wildfire management, but that barriers to workforce include pay disparities, lack of secure benefits, burnout, unsupportive work environments, insufficient funding, and limited access to affordable housing, among other things. So potential ideas to explore might be opportunities for collaboratives to share lessons learned or strategies to address workforce retention challenges. So thanks for bearing with me through that dive into table discussions. Obviously, this was not exhaustive, even though it may have felt so. But generally, this was supposed to give you sort of a flavor of the conversations. So you've got enough context then to weigh in on which broad ideas you'd like to see the CFCN potentially follow up on. Again, recognizing that they don't have to take any of our suggestions. Laura Hickey's going to lead an activity now to kind of focus, kind of extend this discussion into some potential recommendations. And I just wanted to leave you with this slide, sort of reviewing the mission of the network and the potential venues that they could support one or more of these themes. Go ahead, Laura.
Thanks, Chaska. Yeah, Maria, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll just transition into our activity to hear what you all think. So obviously there are a lot of ideas that came up and have been recorded from the CFCN Summit, and we want to start thinking about how this network can help bring some of those ideas to fruition and where those priorities are among the group of attendees that are here today. So we're going to explore questions like which ideas are most exciting to you, think about which of those ideas would have the biggest impact, how some of them might work together or reinforce each other, and also think about the other networks and kind of places where some of these ideas might live better than the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network. And we'll also talk about anything that's missing. So a good handful of you did not attend the summit and might have additional ideas to bring to the table. So with that, let's go ahead and switch, Maria, to our first question. And actually, do we want to address the question in the chat before we move into the activity?
That would actually be great, Laura.
Yeah. Yeah. So question in the chat, curious to see if y'all see or address tensions between going at the speed of trust and the need for action / safe to try experimentation. If we're undergoing a broader rebalancing, what shifts in this space are required to evolve around that? I'll open it up to all the panelists to respond.
I'd be happy to start with that. I started typing in a response to Kathleen, but I didn't finish. But Kathleen, thank you for your question. I think about this all the time in collaboration generally, because there is absolutely a tension between the needs to build trust, sustain relationships, invest in communication, all of this stuff that a lot of us refer to as process-based stuff. Is vitally important that we do that if we're going to operate at the scale at which we need to operate, and if we're going to be able to move forward effectively. And we have to get things done. And we have to learn, as you point out with your question about being able to experiment as well. So doing all of this work in a kind of an adaptive management context where we're doing work, monitoring what's happening, and then reflecting, trying new things, and so forth. But it is vitally important also that we demonstrate progress and get things done on the ground. So my simple answer to your question about, what do we, is there one of these that's more important than others, or how do we address this? My simple answer is we have to do both at the same time. The stages of readiness really has us kind of starting with a more process orientation, the resilience framework and stages of readiness with a more process orientation to make sure we got the right stakeholders involved, putting the right frameworks in place to be able to then build that trust, build the relationships, and then move forward more efficiently and effectively. So in the resilience planning guide and in the stages of readiness document, there's a shift from the earlier stages that are more building relationships, more process oriented, and the later stages that are more focused on getting things done. And yet throughout, we have to do both. Um, I don't I don't know. I'd be curious if anyone else has any opinions on what this rebalancing looks like. I sense a shift where getting things done and demonstrating the ability to get things done is maybe getting more scrutiny right now. I'm not sure about that, but that's a little bit of a sense that I have. So I'll stop there. If there's anyone else who has any thoughts on that, be interested to hear them.
Esther, you have your hand up, and then Ben.
Yeah, I guess I would just I agree with what John shared, and I also think it's just really important like having thoughtful sort of adaptive management and like an engaged facilitator who's really reading what's needed, because in my experience a lot of times there's only so much, and it varies by group, but there's a certain threshold for figuring out all of that governance and sort of side of things before people get frustrated and they want to see some early wins. So I think you kind of have to maybe go back and forth in order for it to feel meaningful, and sometimes people have to come up against the fact that like, oh, we're actually trying to do the work and we can't move forward until we figure out X, Y, and Z. But if you start with figuring out X, Y, and Z and there's no like reason yet for figuring that all out, and it just people can get kind of bogged down in it. So I guess that's my experience with a lot of the collaboratives that we've worked with trying to build out and support. And I would also agree that there has been maybe more pushback about having more documented progress
Mhm.
sooner uh, than maybe we've seen in the past. So feeling that as well.
Thanks, Esther. Ben?
Yeah, I think you can actually have both, in that sense that the right process for experimentation creates trust, but you need to create a learning organization or a learning system. That's
Mhm.
too often experimentation is by the stakeholders are just random. People just try stuff, but then there is no, when we go and work with some of those organizations and say, okay, you wanted to experiment. What were your assumptions? How did you stop? And nothing is explicit. And that's when it creates really confusion for the stakeholders. Was if you include them in your innovation process,
Mhm.
and you have small prototypes and you're very clear on what you're testing and you're sharing the results in a transparent way. That can really do both. You can change the way you're doing business, the way you're doing the mitigation, and you can really engage your stakeholders in. But that you need to have a framework around that. You just can't just make it up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I'll add here that I work as a partnerships facilitator and stakeholder engagement and community engagement specialist. And so, yes, I absolutely see the tension of between going at the speed of trust and the need for um, action. And I think that really comes down to um, there are people are typically process oriented or they're kind of substance and outcome oriented. And as far as what shifts or need to kind of evolve and balance those, it's really around making sure both those kinds of orientations can feel heard and respected along the way. So um, it's it's a big shift, but I'll say to tie it back to as well to some of the summit outcomes, I think that Colorado has a character of collaboration. And so that's just because there's a shift in kind of if planning or moving at the speed of trust or that process orientation is not necessarily being funded. I think that the community and what we heard at the summit is the community still really appreciates and values that piece. So I'll just add that from my perspective. Chaska, any further thoughts on this
Oh, I
question?
have so many thoughts on this question, but I really want to get to the activity before
Yeah.
we run out of time. So let's do that.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, John and Esther and Ben, for the thoughtful responses, and it looks like there is appreciation in the chat for exploring that question as well. So let's go back to some of the ideas that Chaska presented about that we heard from the summit. We want to hear about which ideas are the most exciting to you through the Mentimeter to help prioritize what might be kind of the ideas to implement or act on in 2026. Talk about balancing the speed of trust and action. Let's get some of these ideas into place. And Maria, I might tag you in to help me here. This one is it a ranking question or a
Yeah,
select?
it's a
Okay.
ranking. So, and yes, the first selection would be your top. So it would be the most exciting and then taking it down to least.
Okay. I'm going to leave some space for contemplation here since you're given a long list of things to rank. You need to reconnect back into the Mentimeter, Maria. Dropped that in the chat as well. And it's at the top of the screen here. Okay, looks like we've got some participation here. Give it another minute. Okay. So it looks like some early emerging ideas that fall to the top are new funding mechanisms for collaboratives. I'm going to put a pin in that one because I know we'll get to it with the afternoon session and with um, everything that Esther and Ben worked on there. Looks like reducing bottlenecks in cross-boundary funding programs. So that's a bit about the administrative side of things, addressing Indigenous partnership challenges and climate smart planning and resilience focused actions are kind of our top four there. I am curious to hear from you all in the chat, maybe, which you think, if you think any of these ideas are particularly impactful or particularly ready for implementation in a certain way, and kind of what played into your selections and ranking. And I'll invite from the panelists any, other observations or further questions as well. Esther.
Um, so I noticed that aligning with the Forest Health Council's 30-year vision, it ranked the lowest.
Mm,
I actually ranked it the lowest myself too, even though I've been involved in that process of putting it together. But I do want to point out that I do think there are some there is like important opportunity there, and I think it's probably kind of a low hanging fruit. So some of these ones that are like lower ranked, but I just want to like maybe put in a plug for that there is value there in like
mhm.
having collective influence around elected officials and some of our agency leadership and having a through line with like how we're working together on all of this. So I just a thought I had in like looking at it.
That's a really good observation, Esther. I think too, there were many, I think 40 plus ideas that emerged from the summit, and we had the challenge for this call to kind of group them into 10. And so even this is kind of a short list of priorities potentially, but it's good to know where folks are landing. A comment in the chat about public buy-in, um, hard time moving forward without building trust among the community. Definitely another about learning more about policy ideas for strengthening forest products and biomass challenges. Yeah, those are good observations.
Yeah, and Laura, we had a question. I don't know if
If
it's time to move to that yet, but like there's, we're interested in knowing what like where other conversations are happening around these ideas that we could either leverage with CFCN or um, yeah, just there's so many great ideas to move forward with, and they are moving forward in other venues as well, and we want to make sure that we're tracking on those.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition to the next question where we want to talk a little bit about where else this work is getting done. Um, so this question is asking you to kind of rank on a strongly disagree to strongly agree, which topics, and you'll notice these are kind of the themes that were the basis of the morning session and from those leadership meetings. Which of these topics do you agree have established statewide or regional networks that could address some of the ideas that we've presented and started to prioritize a bit here today? So, for example, for those who mentioned in the chat, do you see a space where or a network where you could talk about public buy-in to gather that social support? And do you have networks where you could learn more about policy ideas for forest products and biomass?
Yeah, like Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, I know had a committee along those lines for a while. Like, have they considered scaling up? Is that committee still active? If anybody knows, please put it in the chat.
We'll give you a little time to think about these topics and the level of network support they have. All right, looks like we have about half the group responding here. And generally speaking, it seems that climate resilience and community engagement might have the most kind of network support. Definitely lower support, and the inverse way to say that is more need for a network around Indigenous partnerships. And landing in the middle is kind of this communications, the forest products, and the workforce piece. So just take another minute to kind of add your thoughts here, and then let's move to the next slide to talk about what are those networks. So as far as the topics that were being addressed, community engagement, and sorry, Maria, could you go back to the prior slide just so I can see those again? Community engagement and climate resilience. What are those networks that you're reaching out to learn about those things or connect about those things? And yeah, who are you working with? I'm sure FACO is one of them. Fire Adapted Colorado. Shout out Laura. The Forest Collaboratives Network. Great. Local NGOs. Thanks for the expansion there on watershed groups or resource conservation districts on the kind of nonprofit types you're looking into. And if you can avoid to being too acronym-y, that would be helpful for our next steps. For making sure we're kind of mapping this out and understanding.
Laura, I do have a comment for you in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you can see that, but I can also read it out loud to you.
Oh,
You do see it?
I do now. Thank you for pointing that out to me. I think there needs to be more intentional exploration for avenues of collaboration with conservation districts, soil conservation districts, who tend to implement USDA revegetation and water efficiency projects with ag producers. CSU extensions, 4-H, et cetera, might be good opportunities for initial education. So I think that's a great note that I'd love to capture in the Mentimeter of specifically why and how and who when it comes to those conservation districts and the networks that might be able to we might be able to reach out to. I'm not sure, Maria, if you were able to capture that.
I am. I'm capturing it. I also have an
Perfect.
attendee that has their hand raised or did have their hand raised. I'm not sure if you want to, that was an accident, and if you wanted to still raise your hand and probably not. I probably called that too early.
Looks like that was Kathleen in the chat confirming it was an accident. A lot of other networks being mentioned. This is super helpful information for us to kind of connect back into. I'm curious if the panelists have any kind of reactions to or experience working with some of these different networks or don't know and need a connection.
I'll speak to that for a second here, Laura. I'm just seeing, I know most of these and I'm aware of most of these, but what I'm wondering about is how much connectivity there really is among them. There are a lot. It's really super encouraging to see all of these different networks and the kind of learning and communications that comes across them. I'm wondering about the connectivity and how we can kind of draw and reshare learning across these networks even more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think maybe for this group of panelists to explore and utilize this information in that way. I want to be really mindful of time and getting to the funding piece that has been already referred to a few times here in our first kind of engagement activity. So I thank you all for your participation and look forward to kind of thinking how CFCN can support this networking, these ideas, and the priorities of the group. And thanks for the questions. It led to really great discussion as well. So with that, I'll hand it off to Esther.
All right. Great. John, can you pull up slide?
Yes. I'm engaging in the chat and was forgetting my job here. Okay, hang on a second.
So Ben and I co-facilitated an afternoon session at the summit that was focused on getting creative with funding. You can go to the next slide, John. So this the session really crosswalked with the Wildfire and Watershed Initiative for Resilient Colorado work, sort of key strategies that have been agreed upon by a diverse group of stakeholders throughout the state for exploring funding with fewer federal resources and how we move forward to support the work that needs to be done. Ben, do you want to, like, maybe just in a couple sentences explain what work is to folks?
Yeah, happy to. So work initially started as an initiative funded by Denver Water and Northern Water. And their main concern initially was how do you engage the private sector in funding wildfire mitigation projects. So that's how I personally got involved through Denver Water. We first conducted a systems analysis that allowed us to demonstrate to Northern and to Denver that the problem was just much larger than just hoping to convince, a few big companies to write a check. That maybe we were at that stage 50 years ago, but we're way past that stage where just a little bit of philanthropic money from companies can make a difference. So we really broadened the coalition to incorporate a lot of the organizations that you all know, of course, COCO, but also all the big nonprofits from TNC to the forest, the National Forest Foundation, businesses, including some of the high-tech businesses that you can find on the Front Range, the utilities, the Forest Service at the state and at the federal level, with really four key issues that we're focused on, and you will see that it really parallels the topics. One is, how do you get funding at the state level? How do you get funding at the local level? How do you engage in private-public partnerships? And the last one is, how do you create the glue that keeps everything together, which we call the forest restoration economy. So yeah, a lot of the same topics that we had at the tables.
Thanks, Ben. So we had subject matter experts who hosted each of these table topics in a World Cafe style breakout to really localize some of those conversations that have been going on at a high level, kind of state level effort to ask local collaboratives, what resonates with them, what are the opportunities and challenges that they identify around these different strategies, and to feed that back into the state level conversation. But also to ensure that there's good sort of awareness among the collaboratives of what these state level conversations are what they're talking about in relation to these strategies. So we did add a few topics. So under local public funding, we broke out forest improvement districts into its own table topic because we had significant interest in that, a deep dive into that. So we had that as a separate table topic. We also added a bridge financing table topic. And then with the forest restoration economy, we kind of broke out this environmental and biomass markets table. But these were the hosts of each of those tables listed here. And I'm not going to provide a summary of each of the breakouts. I'm going to talk about a few of them, but just want to draw awareness again to the link that Maria put in the chat at the beginning of this meeting that has the summary report from the summit, because there is a good, few paragraphs on each of these breakouts and what the key takeaways from them were. So I encourage folks who want to learn more to dive into that, and also feel free to reach out, because there was a substantial amount of notes coming out of these discussions, and condensed those in the summary. So if anybody wants to know more, please reach out, and we're happy to let you know a bit more context on some of those takeaways. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So just a little framing on the problem identification as work has defined it for this, and I don't know why there's extra bullet points there. Sorry, guys. So about 10% of Colorado's 24 million acres of forest need urgent attention to address critical wildfire risk, watershed protection, forest health, and that's an estimated cost of $4.2 billion. And we were using this 150 to 200 million per year over the next 25 to 30 years. And that is the estimate from the Colorado State Forester. And just recognizing that this is not comprehensive of all wildfire mitigation that's and recovery needs in Colorado. But this is really focused on addressing treatments needs for the top 10% priority acres. And so just that framing of how we went into these discussions. Next slide. So the first one I have a summary here of is the statewide public funding, and we already just talked about those estimates of the need, and the discussion in this breakout was really that our state grant programs are super important, but just understanding that there's significantly more need versus the funding available. We have a really significant gap. And there was discussion of models like Restore that could possibly be expanded to include more forest and wildfire work, but really currently we do not have the statewide public funding that's needed to address the wildfire resilience, forest health, even our really top priority projects in the state. And so there's a significant shortfall. And we'll get into a bit later some of the thoughts about how to backfill that. Next slide. So the pooled public-private funding, Ben, do you want to talk about this one? This was you were at this table.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First, but I did two different pieces to that. The public-private funding piece of things. And although it's very important, and that's what keeps a lot of collaborators moving, especially because a lot of that money may be not tethered to a specific project, and you can use it in your general expenses, so it matters. But the scale of it's really a fraction of that $200 million. So we should not be kidding ourselves thinking that with great communication we're going to get the private sector to the rescue on a voluntary basis. That's not going to happen. And for those of you who know me, I'm probably the capitalist here in the room, and I can tell you there's a market failure, and it needs to be public funding first. So that's we need to be realistic with that. I think that there is a way for the private sector to contribute more funding, but it will always be limited. What was really more interesting, I think, at the table was the conversation about what do we mean by pooled. And there was a bit of concern that the big national organization may be the ones, getting the money and then deciding who in the collaborators will be the winners and the losers. And I don't think that's necessarily what was meant by that. There was really a lot of interest in understanding what resources need to be at the collaborative level and what could be housed at COCO, for example, or in another organization. Where does every collaborative need an executive director? Do you all need a subscription to PowerLogix, for example, or to another modeling system, or can it be pooled and will it be more efficient? Like, what GIS resources can that be pooled? So there was really more of that idea of like, is there a pool of resources that could be supported by private sector funding? And I think that is a distinct possibility, a lot more than imagining the private sector is going to be the silver bullet. That's just not realistic.
Thanks, Ben. And I think also something that I included in the summit report but didn't pull out in this slide was the value of having private sector champions of this work, even if their financial contribution isn't huge, having them speak out about the importance of investing in forest health and wildfire resilience. Especially these big, very large employers in our state, they hold a lot of sway with their employees, but also with elected officials, and generally having them aware of that they are beneficiaries of this work being done and being invested in, and that having them speak to that publicly and advocate for it, even if the financial sort of commitment may not be very large, that there is a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and a typical example, for example, on work, we have Lockheed Martin as one of the company deeply engaged in work, and you'd think, why would they even be there? But that triggers those conversations you were talking about. They're a big employer, they care about the front range, and they're telling everybody, yes, wildfire mitigation is a priority. So coming from Lockheed definitely triggers additional discussions with the elected officials.
And maybe reaches different audiences than other outreach, and more effectively. So, okay, we can go to the next. So the bridge financing key takeaways. So this conversation was really around the reimbursement-based grant structure of funding this work and the challenges that go along with that, and some of the opportunities for addressing those challenges. This cash flow or cash in reserve challenge is a bottleneck, a limiting factor in the work, and we had first sort of a space for folks to just speak to that. And this is not new information to those of us working in this space, but it's always a bit shocking nonetheless to hear the individual stories from folks. And one of the participants at the summit shared a case where, as an executive director of a place-based collaborative, they put up their own personal home as collateral for getting a loan to support the work of their nonprofit because they believed in it. They knew that they had funding secured and that they were going to deliver, and they couldn't get the loan that they needed for their organization without doing that. And I know that we can do better than that, and that, as a state, I think this is something that we need to figure out. So conversations at this table, we had folks from my team with the Forest and Water revolving loan fund that were standing up at coalitions and collaboratives. So that fund, and then the Blue Forest Forest Resilience Bonds. We talked about both of those mechanisms and the differences, and sort of what groups would be eligible and a good fit for those different financing mechanisms. And so a lot of good conversation coming out of that, of what the need is, what some of the barriers are, how we could design those to be most effective and to support the needs across the state. And folks talked about, is there a way that we can get our state revolving funds to somehow invest more in this space, was one of the things that folks talked about at that breakout as well. Next slide. And last one I'm going to summarize is the local public funding breakout. So this one was hosted by Jason Swan from Trust for Public Land, talking about success stories, and also, where there have been challenges in passing local ballot initiatives. What kind of taxes are acceptable in different communities varies a lot. The participants talked about water funds and how they haven't seen as much success in Colorado as sort of was promised, or, as folks thought maybe 10, 15 years ago. There was a lot of hype about, maybe this could be a great solution. But there is, also some participants brought up the forest to faucets and peaks to people, and that there is, some of this kind of work in Colorado, maybe not to the magnitude that that folks hoped to see, but that it plays a role, and it's really about targeting that and using it appropriately where there is an opportunity, but maybe not wasting time where there's not an opportunity for that. And Trust for Public Lands is working with work on some new tools to help explore local public funding opportunities. So that's sort of like an assessment tool. Also some resources for communities that help guide them through how to raise local public funds. And one of the things coming out of all of this is a lunch and learn series of webinars that Coalitions and Collaboratives is working with Trust for Public Land, Keystone Policy Center, and FACO to develop. And those will be offered next year. And we're in our mentee breakout. I want to hear a little bit from you guys on some of the topics that you would be most excited about. But really, it's sort of next steps. Jason's done some surveying with folks and really trying to explore what the needs are of our community of practice in this state around building more capacity to raise local funding, because this is a really huge opportunity for backfilling some of the need that we have to fund wildfire resilience. There's also forest improvement districts conversations. Those are a type of special taxing districts to address forest health and wildfire at like the fireshed scale or the watershed scale, cross municipality, cross county kinds of funding mechanisms, and there was a separate breakout on those as well. And there's some conversations with the Forest Health Council as well about, you know, changes to be made to the forest improvement districts, and how they could maybe work for us in the future, or whether it's not realistic. There's a lot of conversation about that right now, and we did collect the perspective from local collaboratives to weigh in on that. And then yeah, there was sort of just the general sense that county level makes sense unless we can use special districts effectively, like these FIDs. And part of that was the idea that, you know, going larger is better. Like folks want to invest in their own communities, but the more that we can broaden what they consider their community, the more we have the ability, because sometimes, you know, the most well-resourced communities, or the opportunities for raising tax dollars, don't really align with where the need is. So the more that we can broadly define that you know, community and investing in your own community, really helps us to better form that alignment.
Esther, just say, you know, building on what we discussed, you know, the reality is federal funding is not going to come back for a while, if it never does. State level funding right now is, you know, almost a no-go. Private funding, as we say, is really small. So, you know, just to be honest, local public funding is where the game is going to be played. And so if the participants have to put some efforts, of course, private funding to keep you going matters, but where you're going to have an impact is your local public funding. I mean, that our analysis was really clear in the next 2 to 5 years. That is where the game is gonna be played. So yeah, we just, you know, if locally you have contacts with elected officials, if you want to reach out to learn what worked in other communities, please do, because that's where you need to spend your political capital.
Absolutely. And John, if you go to the next slide, I think we might summarize some of that. Yep. So private funding sources are insufficient to meet the funding needs. Public funding sources are essential, likely is the majority funding source. And to be even more specific, what Ben just said, local public funding. Because forest and wildfire issues are still mostly seen as local issues. That's where the willingness to pay, where you find that. And so, figuring out how we design that to meet the need, I think is where a lot of attention should be placed right now. There was also sort of a broader conversation coming out of the summit that, like most forest and fire events, the Colorado Forest Collaborative Summit is, you know, mostly a practitioner-focused event. And one of the things identified across both our morning and afternoon sessions was the need to get more elected officials and private sector involvement. And so thinking about a next step statewide wildfire Congress or something at the Water Congress that really focuses on wildfire is something that the organizing team has talked with Ben about, and ways that we might support that moving forward. I think that would be a great thing for the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network to help support. I think with that we can jump into, we have just a few Menti questions. So I mentioned the local funding lunch and learn webinar that we are working on putting together, preparing in the next couple months, and would love to hear from you all. These are some of the topics that we've talked about, including in some of our first few sessions, and would love to hear from you on sort of in order which ones of these you're most interested in learning more about. Are folks able to get in there to the Menti to rank these? There we go. Cool. Forest improvement districts. Yeah, I think that's something that is very timely too. So likely something that it would be good to talk about soon. Well, I am going to pass these on to the team of those of us who are working on organizing this lunch and learn. So this is really helpful for us to think about what we focus on moving forward. And the next question is whether you all know of subject matter experts that you'd recommend to cover any of these topics, sort of their name, affiliation, and what topic. We have a list of some folks, but we'd love to hear from any input you all have on somebody who would be great to bring in to the lunch and learn on local funding. Any ideas? And folks can send them to me separately too if something occurs to you later.
Hey, John, do you want to respond to Steve's comment in the chat?
Cool. All right. Well, we can move on if folks don't have specific recommendations, but do let me know if there's anybody that you all hear talking about ideas that you want to reach a broader audience around local funding opportunities, and I will make sure that those get passed on to the group. So any other topics on local funding that weren't included in that list that I provided at the beginning that people want to learn about? Is there anything that your group has tried or wants to try and would like to learn more about? Okay. We'll reach out if folks come up with ideas beyond what we listed. It sounds like we must have been incredibly comprehensive in our initial identification. That's all thanks to Becca Samalski at FACO. I think she created, I think that list was all or mostly all her ideas that she put in. Um, okay, I don't think, do I have any other questions? Oh yeah, the ballot initiative question. I am curious to hear if any of you all are working on ballot initiatives in your community for 2026 or 2027 that would fund, forest health, wildfire resilience, as part of what the funding is for.
Yeah, I would love to know that there are other groups like the Colorado Forum, which is a group of CEOs across Colorado that would be willing to support some of those initiatives. So even if it's early stage, please reach out because we may be able to help you.
We only have 2 minutes left, but as that's populating, and Esther, we're collecting that. John, you had mentioned that one chat mentioned the WCS network analysis study, and you were asking for that person potentially share the link or email a copy. So I wanted to verbally express that before we got off this call.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. And yes, for everyone on the call, Chaska already messaged me privately and said that she can send a copy. But for all of you who are still with us, we've lost a few, but we will be sending the recording of this meeting, the chat comments, the resources that were mentioned, and of course the summit summary, which you've already received. But we're going to be, and I may have missed one or two things as well, but we'll be sharing all of this through the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network newsletter and on the network's website. So stay tuned to all of that. If you don't subscribe yet to the network, please do. I don't think the emails are overwhelming there, and they often contain a lot of useful information. Reach out to me, John Sanderson, if you'd like at any point on any of these topics. And I mentioned, I think it may have gotten into the chat, that Katie is going to be back at her desk immediately after Thanksgiving. So she's going to be available going forward as well. So stay tuned, but mostly I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today, and thank you to the panelists especially as well. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.